So how did I end up a captive? We took off out of Bogota, Colombia. Just out of nowhere, I hear this very loud noise. It's just a bzzz sound. We're in an airplane. It's got only one engine, and we just lost the engine. Our pilot, he saw a little tiny postage stamp clearing. I see this group of people. They're all running towards us, and some are shooting at us. In Colombia, all of that cocaine production is controlled by terrorist groups. The biggest one at that time was called the FARC. They call themselves revolutionaries, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. They're really, though, they're just terrorists. That's when it dawned on me, it's like, we just landed on the FARC. They had their weapons drawn on us, and they approached, and we put our hands up, and they took us.
So we're back. This is Reformed Mindset. I'm Michael Rosado. I'm one of your co-hosts on the show. We are here with your other co-host, Marc Gonsalves, who's been telling us a little bit about his story. We're going to pick up where we left off from the last episode. So if you did not watch the last episode, my suggestion is that you go back and watch it now. Like, subscribe, comment, any questions that you might have, direct message us, and we will respond as quickly as we can. Marc, we left off, you were in an encampment. And you had just gotten these messages from your mother, and you were talking about the emotional impact there. So I want to pick up kind of back right after that. If you could just start off, man.
Yeah. So at that point during the captivity, we were still less than 1 year in, and every camp that I call them camps, every location we were put in, we came up with a name for each one. And so we got into this place, and we called it Camp Caribe. And Camp Caribe was, man, not to use the suffering of the Jewish people lightly, but this camp was like a concentration camp. It reminded me of a Nazi-style concentration camp. I mean, the enclosures, the way they had dozens of hostages piled up on top of each other. They had elevated guard posts. They were very organized. These terrorists were very organized. They would change duty. The guards would change duty every 2 hours. When they came on duty, they all carried either Chinese rifles or AK-47s, weapons like that. And they would rack a bullet into the chamber every time they came on duty. So every 2 hours, we heard that, it was a constant reminder that they had their weapons loaded for us. But on the other side of it, that was our first exposure to other hostages in captivity. So when we were there, we were put into the side of the enclosure where there was other civilian hostages. And that's when we got exposure to radios, to messages from home, and to the news, and this was really the first time we were hearing the truth about our situation, what we were there for, how long other people were there, what it was going to take to get us out of there. And so back then, this is in 2003, 2004, the president of the U.S. was President Bush. And for those that don't remember, his policy was strict. They would not negotiate with terrorists. Also, the president of Colombia, President Uribe, had the very same policy. So when the news would come on those radios, man, we were tuned in, and every time something was discussed, it would either put us on an emotional high or an emotional low. And at that time, the president of Colombia was fed up with the terrorists. There was multiple terrorist groups at the time, but the FARC was the largest one. And the FARC they weren't doing anything good. I mean, all they were doing was killing, setting off bombs, taking hostages. I mean, they had thousands of hostages at the time. We were only 3 civilians, but they had lots of hostages. And so what he decided to do was he was going to apply much more military pressure to the FARC. And so he started this operation called Patriot Plan Patriótica in Spanish. And it worked. When I say it worked, I saw it from inside the jungle. At the beginning of captivity, the FARC would roam the jungle freely. I mean, without a care in the world, man. They would be running chainsaws, running boats, making noise, had access to plenty of supplies. But as the months and years went on, the Patriot Plan was having an effect, and the FARC had to be quiet. They had problems getting supplies, problems getting food, and there was a lot more military activity in the region. So, well, really, when I say the region, in the jungle. So Keith, Tom, and I, one of the things that we knew we needed to do was figure out how to best set ourselves up for survival. We knew that the FARC's objective during a rescue operation was to massacre hostages and flee themselves. So one of the first things we all agreed on was to try to manage the guards, even though we had limited control of anything. We wanted to manage the guards in a way so that they felt we were not a danger to them and that we were also not a flight risk. And that was something that was hard to do. You know, we would have to tolerate a lot of significant abuses and show zero response. You know, when they wanted to tie us to a tree, it was, you know, we would have to agree with that and not resist. And we knew that one of the strategies was to save resistance for when it was going to actually provide value. And there's very few opportunities where that can provide value, but one of those opportunities is during a rescue attempt. And so whenever we got moved into a new location, one of the very first things we would do was check out the location and see what would we need to do in the case of a rescue.
And now, Mark, you knew that they were to execute you during a rescue attempt because the guards conveyed this to you, or it was just like common knowledge inside the camps that this was what was going to happen?
So during our first proof of life, right, which was just a few months before we were moved to Camp Caribe, we were told by one of their translators that
I remember this, yeah.
That was their policy. And she also explained to us that they had just done that they had massacred a group of 24 hostages who had been there already for several years. But the military arrived in helicopters. The terrorists heard the helicopters arriving, and they didn't hesitate. They just turned their weapons on the hostages and they mowed them down. And then they fled into the jungle and basically disappeared. But the leader of that terrorist group that was in charge of maintaining those hostages, he had the foresight to say, well, I better make sure they're all dead. And he actually sent a couple of guerrillas back, and they went to each body and they put a pistol, they shot each one with a pistol in the head to ensure that they were all dead. So, and then, while we're there after this, they did it again, and they killed massacred another group of hostages. It was like 13. And so we knew, they had told us they were going to do that. And then we heard in the news and we heard via them that that's what they did. And they had been doing that. So, here we are, we're in Camp Caribe. This is this is a camp that has the most infrastructure out of any of the camps that we had been in, chain link fence going all the way around, elevated guard towers. And it looked really bad. But when Keith, Tom, and I were assessing it, we found that there was one spot where there was a little divot in the ground where somebody could crawl underneath the chain link and get out. And so our plan was, in the case of a rescue, to go for that. And that was going to be our way. And the idea is just to make a small amount of distance between us and the guards. It doesn't need to be a lot. As long as they can't see you when they're spraying the bullets, there's a higher chance of survival. And so throughout this time, we've been bombed. We've heard a lot of air activity, but we'd never heard any helicopters. Aside from the initial crash, we hadn't heard any helicopters while we were being held in the jungle. But one night, we heard something different, and I thought it was an airplane. And Keith Stansell, who was a crew chief, he'd worked around aviation his whole life. He was in the Marine Corps, Army after that. He knew what it was instantly. He goes, those are Black Hawks. And it was dark out. and we were listening to them, and they sounded like they were approaching directly to us. And I said, guys, it's time, let's activate the plan, let's go to that 1 weak spot. And so we made our way over to the chain link, not far, and we're listening to the helos approach. And I went out first, and I crawled out underneath the chain link fence, and I'm on my belly, and I'm just making distance between me and the enclosure we were just being held in.
Were you afraid just in that moment? Because, I mean, if they see you doing this, they're going to shoot you. Like, they're not going to hesitate. Even if there is no rescue attempt at this point in time, you're risking your life for your freedom.
So yeah, I was scared. I'd love to be able to say, no, man, I handled it like a hero. No, I was crapping my pants, man. I was for sure that this was a rescue, and I was for sure they were going to kill all the hostages. Otherwise, I wouldn't have snuck out, because it wasn't the time. I definitely didn't know where in the jungle I was. If I was to escape, I didn't know what direction to go in. I wasn't ready to escape yet. But because I believed that was a rescue coming, my heart was pounding, man. And I was trying as hard as possible to control my breath and to be as quiet as possible as I was on my belly, just crawling away. And I probably made maybe 10 yards, 15 yards distance. And as I'm making my way away from the structure or this enclosure, I'm thinking to myself, man, Keith and Tom are silent. I'm impressed. I can't believe how quiet they are.
And 10 or 15 yards in this situation is like 30 or 40 in a normal situation.
In the jungle, you could disappear in that distance, right? You could never be found in that distance. And that's, that could be all you need. So I stop, and I whisper, Keith, Tom, and there's no answer. And I realize that they're still inside the enclosure. They hadn't snuck out.
So you're not there by yourself.
So I'm out there by myself, right? And I'm hearing the helicopters coming, and it's just, my heart is thumping. I'm trying to be as quiet as I can. It was a night that was pitch black. There was no moon. Thank God for that. And I'm just listening to the helos, and they just fly right over and keep on going. It wasn't a rescue. They just kept on going. It was just a coincidental flyby. And so here I am. I'm outside of the enclosure. Nobody knows I'm gone yet. And I have a choice to make. Do I go back in, or do I try to make a run for it? And I knew that was not the moment. I felt like that wasn't the moment to go. And in a lot of cases throughout our captivity, it wasn't so much the guards that were holding us there. It was the jungle. The jungle's immense, man. It's immense. So I made the choice to belly crawl back to the place where I just snuck out of and try to get back in. And man, I'm telling you, as I'm on my belly and I'm making my way back, I felt like I was digging my own grave as I was going back into the thing. I make it to the fence, the chain link that I had just crawled out of. Like, I pushed my way out of it. And so when I got there, I tried to push my way in. And chain link, really, when it's set up, it only bends one way. And it's pitch black, but I could hear the footsteps of a guard approaching. And I started to panic almost. I'm like, I need to get in here quick or he's going to see me. And like I would say, just in the last moment, I figured I needed to pull on the chain link and to pull it up and just roll myself in. And that's what I did. And I got in there before anybody noticed that I was gone. The only ones that knew that I was gone were Keith and Tom. And I said, dudes, what? You were supposed to come with me. So I was back in. No one else knew that I was gone. And within a few minutes, the guards, they had been at the door of this enclosure, and they started to call us out of there, and they moved us out of the camp that night.
This is a big thing, because had you chosen to possibly run, you could possibly not be here today. If not, you said the jungle is like its own barrier and its own fence. That could have taken you. The jungle itself could have taken you. Much less they would have recognized possibly that you'd been gone and hunted you down.
At the minimum, I would have been caught. no doubt. They would have found me. And what that would have done was it would have increased the levels of security that they would have put on us. And what that would mean is harder for us to scatter like chickens when a rescue comes. Because really, at that point during captivity, that was our focus, was when a rescue comes, we need to be able to create distance between us and the guards. And at that point, we had options. I crawled out. If that would have been a rescue, I probably would have survived it because I had enough distance. But the thing was, it wasn't a rescue.
But that's a critical decision that you made. And you obviously made the right one because you're here now, and that could have affected things that happened later on that I've read in your book, these parts and pieces that I know already that we're getting to. That could have affected possibly the outcome of your eventual rescue.
Yeah.
So you made the right decision. Again, we talk about your faith sometimes and God having his hand on you. So
Yeah. And in so many ways, I mean, if it would have been a night where there was a moon, I would have been seen. Just the fact that it was a pitch black night, that alone saved me. And luckily, because I was able to get back in, we were able to continue with our strategy of trying to convey the fact that we were not dangerous to them. And again, the whole purpose at that time, was to just have the minimum amount of security. And really, I would say anybody that's in a situation, God forbid, I don't want anybody to get in a situation like that where you're being held hostage. But when you're in a situation like that, you have to be smart and you have to choose your moments to resist. I mean, always keep in mind, have your mind towards resistance and escape or separation during a rescue. You have to always be mindful of that, but you have to be smart about that. And you only have a couple of cards to play when you're a hostage. You don't get very many, and so you have to play them very wisely. It's hard to discern, especially once you're kept in a vacuum and you don't know what's going on around you. You don't know what the status of the world is. You don't know what kind of efforts are being done to rescue you or negotiate your freedom. It's hard to make a decision, but you have to be mindful and alert and observant of your surroundings and especially of the people that are holding you.
So they moved you out of the camp that night, right after those helicopters flew over. Okay, and where did they take you?
Yeah, so at that point, they just moved us probably 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers away from the camp, and they set up a temporary place to hold us. And at that point, we were not being held in chains yet. Us, the 3 Americans and the civilians. The military hostages were being held in chains. And when we saw that, we were like, man, we have to avoid chains at all costs. They chain these guys from the neck, from one person's neck to the other, and it's extremely inhumane, but also makes it extremely hard to deal with rescues and things like that. It makes it hard for mobility. They would move us out of that camp for a few days, and then ended up bringing us back in. And I think they did that as they prepared for a bigger move. And at that point, they ended up taking the 3 of us and they took us out of there. And we didn't see those other hostages, most of those other hostages ever again. And they put us in other camps, and then they kept on moving us. So the military pressure at that point had built up quite a bit. And so we were on the move. I mean, they would put us in a camp. We might be there for a couple of weeks, and then we would move for a few months. And these movements were all on foot, and they were brutal because, again, we're moving through the jungle, and we had to carry backpacks. And so, when you're a hostage in the jungle like that, you have very few belongings. But we did have some things, like they gave us some clothing, T-shirts, pants. We had rubber boots. I was very fortunate that I had a Bible. And man, I prayed for this.
I wanted to get to that. I wanted to wait on that because there's two things that are sitting on my mind now, but I want to wait on that Bible for a second. If you will hold off before we talk about that Bible, because that is an amazing story. But I want to talk about the food, like especially at that encampment where you were at. Does the food differ from when you were out in the jungle or in certain places? And did they even feed you anything that was healthy, that was nutritious, that would get you through marching through a jungle?
Yeah, the food was extremely basic. So, the jungle is, when I say we're in these camps, those camps don't have anything. I mean, they're basically just made out of sticks and tarps that they're used for like roofs and cord. It's not like there's electricity, there's no refrigeration, they're cooking with wood fire. Or sometimes they're using like gasoline stoves and things like that. So the food is all dried stuff. And in the beginning, they had more of it. So they would give us rice and peas, or rice and lentils, rice and beans. They would have pasta noodles, and they would make pasta. But when I say pasta, it's not like what you're thinking at home, like pasta with sauce and seasoning. This is just boiled noodles, and sometimes there was salt in it. They would catch animals, so by the rivers, they would catch fish. We ate all kinds of stuff. We ate snakes, we ate monkeys, whatever they could kill. And when they kill an animal, they eat every single part of it, literally every single part of it. And so but in the beginning, there was more, right? But as the Patriot Plan went on and put pressure on these guys, the food sources started to drain a little bit, and they had lower supplies of rice and beans. They had to be more quiet in the jungle, so there was less hunting and fishing opportunities for them. And so the food quickly went downhill. When the food was good, like let's say they get a cow and they slaughter a cow, the way they do things there is they serve the parts of the cow that rot first. So that's usually the areas around the bone. So as hostages, they would chop up the bones, and they would boil them, and that's what they would serve us. Was bone with whatever cartilage or fat, or if we were lucky enough to have some chunks of meat on it, that's what we would eat first. And then they would eventually serve or cook the actual meat of the cow. But usually by the time they cooked that, it was rotten. And it was very rare that they actually had cow. I could count like on my hand, maybe it was 5 times or less throughout the entire captivity that we saw beef there. But when we did see beef, it was never good. I mean, it was, by the time they gave you meat, it was rotten. They would try to dry it, or they would try to salt it to preserve it, but it was rotten. So the food was brutal.
Was there any kind of food that your body rejected, or you were just like, I'm not eating that? Or was there something that was hard for you to get? Like, I can't imagine eating monkey. Like, that's not.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound enticing at all. And I've been hungry before.
No. Yeah. When you're starving, you will eat. You'll eat almost anything.
Okay.
And so when they would kill a monkey and you're starving, I mean, you haven't had anything, you'll eat it. And I ate monkey, and I was like, wow, this tastes like it's mesquite flavored. Would I eat it again? Heck no, I never would. There were times when they had chickens, and in this Camp Caribe, they had a bunch of chickens, and I tried to capture one, and I could never capture it. I tried to get it and make a nest for it, a place for it to stay inside of our enclosure so that we could get its eggs, but that thing would always escape. But they would sometimes kill the chickens and serve chickens. And to the hostages, and I kid you not, in the American society, we would never think of this, but they boil the heads of the chickens, and that's what they would serve to us, was the chicken head. And man, I don't know, I remember so many times, they would dole out the food, and I would have this chicken head, and I would look at it, and its beak falls off when they boil it, and I'd be like, man, I'm hungry, but I'm not that hungry. I'll leave the chicken head, and I would give it to somebody else or something. But the food was tough.
What's the longest? I'm sure there were time periods where it was hard for them to provide food for you, but what's the longest you went without eating or having something of nutrition? Was there a long period of time, or were there stretches that were regular where you didn't eat anything for?
Well, we would have long stretches where we would eat minimally. So, because they would always try to budget out whatever they had, right, until they knew they could hit another resupply. And so what they would do is just serve less. So, and one of the things that they would do a lot was put things in soup. So if they had a little bit of lentils and a little bit of rice, they would, just serve it as a very soupy, a basic soup that had a couple lentils and rice in there. And we would do very long periods like that. And it's funny because when you start to go in that state of starvation and your body starts to eat itself, your teeth and your head, they don't shrink. The rest of your body shrinks down, but your teeth, your mouth, and your skull stays the same size. And I remember we were in going through one of these phases where they didn't have access to food and we were eating the bare minimum. We would eat something every day, some type of soup every day, but we were starving. And they had brought us down to the river to take a bath one time. And at that point, it was Keith, Tom, and I, and we were with another small group of hostages. And I remember looking at the other hostages, and I was like, man, everybody looks like a stick figure with a big head, big mouth, big teeth, and little skinny stick figure bodies, and you could see our ribs. We looked sick, we looked frail, skinny. And it dawned on me, it's like, this is starvation. We are actually starving right now. And then they would have to move us. And so you're without food and you have to carry a backpack and you're being forced to move through the jungle, which is burning even more calories. And our bodies were literally just eating themselves.
People talk about this stuff all the time. People tell me, oh, I'm hungry. Like, you just ate. Even if you ate breakfast and you ate 2 eggs, 4 slices of bacon, and 2 pieces of toast, you ate probably more of a nutritional value than you've eaten probably in 2 or 3 days.
Right.
So, that puts things in perspective. When somebody says, oh, I'm hungry, or I'm starving, you're not really starving, you're not really hungry. Just incredible. Again, it's incredible. Moving forward, let's get back to the Bible. So, and ladies and gentlemen, I touched this Bible, so I can tell you that there's something to this. You prayed for this, right? I'm gonna let you go ahead and talk about this here.
Yeah, I had already seen a couple of for me, there's no doubt they're miracles. Other people that don't believe, they're like, coincidence. I had already seen a couple of miracles, right? And so we're in the jungle and I'm doing that time down there. I don't know how long I'm going to be there, but I'm like, I don't want this time to be wasted time, and I would pray. I was like, Lord, if only I had a Bible, I could study your word, and I could get to know you more, But I said, but Lord, I need this Bible to be in English because I don't know Spanish yet. So please, God, send me a Bible, And I would ask for a Bible daily, every day. I would pray for a Bible. And I knew it was impossible to get. We're in the jungle. There is nothing. There's no reading materials. There's no books. There's no magazines. There's no newspapers. Nothing like that. There's no roads. That we're in the middle of nowhere. And I knew I was asking for something that's impossible, but I kept on asking for it, and I for some reason believed I could get a Bible in English there, and it had to be in English because I didn't know Spanish yet. And so when we're in Camp Caribe, this is the first time we're seeing other people and other hostages. Well, one of the other hostages had a Bible. He was in a different side of that camp. He was a soldier in the army that was captured during combat, and he had been there for several years. And he had a Bible. And when he knew that the Americans were there, he asked one of the guards to deliver the Bible to us. And amazingly, I don't know why the guards did this, but because this is not something they normally would do, but they brought the Bible over from his side of the camp to our side of the camp and gave it to me. And I was like, what? And I opened the Bible, and not only is it in English, but it's every verse is one column is in English and the other side of that column is in Spanish. And I was like, another miracle. And I just had to laugh because I'm like, man, I asked God for these things and he knows more. He knows more about what I need than I think I know about what I need. And so I started to read that Bible all the time, man. Every day I was studying it. But what I found myself doing was I would read a verse in English, and then I would go over to the Spanish translation and I would read that same verse in Spanish. And that was something that helped me. It was one of the things that helped me to learn Spanish. And dude, you can't get a Bible in English in the jungle. You can't, there is none. They're not there. God put that there for me. So that was one of my prized possessions. When they took us out of Camp Caribe, I wanted to send that Bible back to the soldier that sent it to me, but I had no opportunity. They had just taken us out of there. And so throughout all of my captivity, I always had that Bible in my possession. I read it every single day. I still have it right now at home.
And I've held this Bible, and you can feel, when you handed it to me, I could feel your attachment to it, and I can feel how God worked with you in that moment. Because how many more English publications did you see in the jungle period in 5.5 years?
Only one. There was only one other one that we received in the first Proof of Life. That was it. That was the only other English words that we saw when we were in captivity.
The whole time. So again, in the middle of a jungle, in the middle of nowhere, you had been praying for this every day. And then out of nowhere, did that lift your spirit? Did that bring hope into your life that God, you're a believer, so God is still with you? And
Yeah. I mean, that showed me all of these things, surviving the crash in the mountains. That showed me surviving the bombing, surviving other air attacks while we were there. These were all things that were like proof, man. It's like, I couldn't just say, well, that's a coincidence. We got lucky. We survived the plane crash, or we got lucky. We didn't get bombed. It was getting like, it was too much. It was harder to not believe these were acts of God than to believe that they were coincidence. It was just too much. And so I thought, therefore, that I could ask for freedom, that I could ask for some way for us to get out of there. And that was always one of my prayers, was to get out of the jungle. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but at some point to be free again. And so, people ask me, did you have hope? And I did, even though all of the evidence around me told me we would never get out of there. Everything I knew about our situation told me that President Bush would not negotiate for us. President Uribe would not negotiate for us. The FARC would not allow us to be rescued alive. Escape was almost impossible. Everything about, every fact, every piece of proof that I knew about my situation said I would die there. And nevertheless, I believed that we would be free at one point or another. Now, I did have my down days. I had days where I was like, oh, this is tough. Keith would have his down days, or Tom would have his down days. And one of the things that happened in captivity between the three of us was we became super in tune with each other's energy. And that was very helpful, because when I would see Tom suffering, I would try to lift him up. Or the same thing, man. I remember one morning, right? I had just woken up out of an amazing dream. In this dream, I was free, and I was with my family, and my daughter, 9.5 years old, was sitting on my lap. And she had these little braids in her hair, and I remember touching the braids and holding her and being free and being happy. And it felt real, man. It was real. In that dream, everything was just perfect. But then I woke up, and I was a hostage, and I was crushed, man. It was one of the harder days that I had in captivity, and I was just so crushed that it felt like my head weighed 100 pounds and I could barely lift my chin off of my chest. You know, I was just down, so down. And this was earlier on when we weren't allowed to speak to each other. And Keith and Tom both must have sensed my dark, depression, this real sadness that I was going through. And at one point, they both came over to me, and one on each side wrapped their arms around me, man, and literally lifted me up. And that was one of the things that I benefited from. I would never wish this type of captivity on anybody, but man, I am so lucky I wasn't alone. I mean, I'm glad I was there with Keith Stansell and Thomas Howes. I mean, I needed them.
So speaking on that, you didn't get to speak with them for roughly the first 9 months of your captivity. You weren't allowed to talk. You were allowed physical interaction like you just showed me now, though, correct?
No, we weren't. They weren't supposed to do that, but they did anyways. They did anyways. They came over from their section of the camp to mine, which wasn't far. We were held in tight areas, and did that, even though they weren't allowed to do that.
So, wow, I'm glad that you had them also, because again, you're an incredible person, and it takes incredible people. It takes a village to raise a child. That's something I've heard many, many times. I didn't understand it until I was being raised. Even as a man, I was being raised into being a better man. You finally get to talk to them, though, when you got to Camp Caribe?
It was right after the proof of life.
That you were
they asked us during that first proof of life, what do you guys need? And we said, we need a radio. We need to be allowed to speak to each other. We need t-shirts. We need all of these things. Well, they never gave us anything, and they never told us either that you guys could talk again, but we just started talking, and we never got reprimanded. So it was at that point that we were able to talk again, and again, thank God for that, because one of the survival mechanisms for us was to talk and fantasize about being free, and this was very important for us. We talked about what life would be like if we ever got free again. And we made plans together. We said, hey, this is a crazy experience. If we ever get out of here, let's the three of us together as brothers write a book together. And that's what we did. We had this other plan, right? I've always been a guy that loves riding motorcycles. And we talked about, if we ever get out of there, let's just go buy some cheap used Harley Davidsons and go on a tour of the United States, and we would talk, man, I don't know how many hours we talked about this, and we named it, we're like, it's going to be the freedom ride. We're going to just ride motorcycles and we're going to be free, and so we would come up with all these different things. We would talk about work. We would talk about being dads again. We would talk about just experiencing freedom, travel, all of these different things. And that was really important for us, just for sanity, to be able to cope with what was going on. Because the reality was, we were being held hostage. We were being treated cruelly by some of the guards, not all of them. A lot of them didn't understand what they were doing with us, but some of them were extremely cruel. And so it was difficult, to deal with, but just the mind, is so powerful. Being able to escape mentally and think about other things was very important to us.
That's what I was leading up to, is I wanted to hear some of your communications, especially after such a long period of not being able to speak, not being able to express yourself. It must have been a flood. I mean, it must have been just a very emotional time. And that's one of the things that we're going through. We're going through your book, of course, which is amazing. The book that you guys talked about writing, that they went out and wrote together and put together. This book is incredible. I actually read this while I was in confinement. For those of you that don't know, I did 26 years incarcerated. And Mark, you brought me a copy of this book. And I read it while I was in confinement, in transition to be transferred to another institution. And I would go back through the pages and I would reread certain parts, and I would look at the pictures and I would look at the pictures and I would be like, my friend was there. The person I care about was right here and he lived through this. So, you know, if nobody else gets a chance to read it, just know that I read it and it meant something to me in a very dark place and a very dark time for myself also. Moving forward, you got the communication, you guys start talking, you make it past those emotional barriers. The freedom ride. Maybe let's save that. Let's go in in chronological order here and try and just get it all down.
Yeah.
So you're still in captivity. Moving forward, you move out of Camp Caribe and you're headed where? What's going on? What's the next?
Yeah. So again, you know, they're just trying to dissolve into the jungle, you know, and so they take just the three of us out of there, and they put us on a hella long march, man. We must have been probably over 2 months marching, you know, and at this point I touched on, we're carrying backpacks with the very few belongings that we have, our clothing. I had the Bible. We had bug nets. They gave us bug nets there, and that was very important because the jungle, pure, you know, bugs, mosquitoes, everything that wants to bite, sting, and poison you is in this jungle. And so we slept in bug nets. And what we used as a backpack was a homemade, they use this waterproof material to sew these things together. It's just a shoulder straps and weight all on your shoulders. These things were torture devices on their own, especially because they were weighed down, not only with the few items that we own, but they would also make us carry food too. So at one point, we were marching and we went through a drug laboratory, right? It was a place where they would process coca leaves and turn it into coca paste. And they actually had us stay there that night. And inside this little structure was a scale. And so we weighed all of our backpacks, and mine was weighing 47 pounds, man. And I must have been weighing, you know, 147 pounds by that time. And so these things were heavy. And these marches were torturous, man, because, you know, we're not wearing proper footwear. We're just wearing rubber boots, and we're going, I mean, we're in mountains usually, ups and downs. A lot of times they were just cutting a trail with machete, and we were starving, right? And so I used to play this little mental game with myself where I would pretend that I'm not a hostage being forced to walk, that I'm going on a hike, you know, that I'm doing a ruck, you know, and I would pretend I've got a proper backpack, you know, with proper straps and balanced weight distribution, and I'm wearing good footwear, you know, and so I would, you know, then I would imagine maybe, you know, I'm going on a hike, I'm with my brother and he and I are going on a hike, and what kind of backpack would I be carrying, and what kind of food would be in this backpack, and how would we cook it when we get to our camp? What kind of tent would I have? And so, you know, I would do that with a lot of things, but with those marches specifically, you know, I tried to own them in a different way and just imagine and visualize I was doing something else, you know. And it's crazy how the mind works, because it was common. We would all do that. We would create this our own little bubble that we lived in and try to distort reality to try to make the entire situation easier to cope with. We were moving at one point, and again, we're starving, we're without food, and we're in a very mountainous region, and our guards are starving as well. And the leader of the guard group, his name was Milton. And this guy was pure evil, man. He was a very bad guy, but he was also a very nervous guy. You know, he wasn't like this stoic, brave person. He was always panicking, and that made us even more nervous when he would get in these panic modes. Well, we're marching and going up a mountain when suddenly a group of monkeys starts passing overhead, right? And we haven't eaten for a while. And so Milton pulls out, they've got this 22 rifle, and they like to use a 22 down there because it makes less noise. And at that point, they had to be as quiet as possible. And he starts shooting at these monkeys, and he takes one down. And the monkey falls. He sends one of the guerrillas to go get it, and they drag it right over to where the three of us are being watched. And the monkey's still breathing, man. He hit it in the head. There's blood coming out of its head, but it's still breathing. And Milton pulls his machete out, and he whacks at the monkey in the head to try to kill it, try to finish it off. And all he does is just cut it even more, and it's bleeding even more. And so the monkey's still there. It's just laying on its back, its arms wide open like this, its chest heaving as it's breathing. And man, Milton took the machete and he cut its legs off. He cut one leg off, then he cut the other leg off, and then he cut both its arms off, one and then the other.
While the monkey was still alive.
While it's still alive, it's still breathing. And you can see its chest moving, its eyes were open. You know, it's probably unconscious, or eyes were open, it's still breathing. And he took each limb and had these guerrillas tie it to the backs of their backpacks, you know, one each, and we kept on marching. And he left the animal there, still breathing, still alive, no arms or no legs. And that was one of the most disgusting things I'd ever seen, man. And when in the previous episode, I talked about imagining killing somebody, and it was Milton that I used to imagine killing. You know, if only there was a cliff I could throw him off of, or if only there was a way, you know, I used to, and here I am talking about my faith, you know, and at the same time, I want to kill this guy. And I'm like, if only there was a way I could kill him. We walked away from that monkey, and in front of me is one of the guards. He's got a limb of the monkey dangling from his backpack, and we're going to eat that later. We're going to eat those pieces of that monkey later. And I just thought, man, if Milton, he could do that to that monkey, to him, we are no different than that monkey or than a chicken that you cut its head off and eat it. We're no different than that. I was like, he can and he will do that to us when he's given the order to. And it was just a very nasty reminder of where we were. So every once in a while we would get these things, you know, we would live in this little bubble to deal and adapt to the situation. But that bubble would get burst every once in a while when you would see these very inhumane acts.
Did you guys talk about this incident later on, you and your
Yeah, that's it's just one of those things that you can never forget when you see it. You know, you can never forget that. Yeah, just such an inhumane thing, you know, and for these terrorists, life is nothing. Human life, any life, it's nothing. They'll snuff it out like that. They don't care. They really don't care. And that's what they've done to the country. The FARC, look them up. Look up the FARC. All they have done is commit terrorism and violence in Colombia. They've done nothing good for it. They claim to be a revolutionary group, but they've done nothing. They're narco traffickers. They control cocaine production, and they kidnap people and extort people and murder people.
And they held my dear friend in the jungles in horrific conditions, and that automatically makes me not a fan. And Mark, I want you to understand something, that people can deny whatever they want to deny. You can say that you've never had a bad thought, you've never had a negative thought, but even in Christian communities, we understand that the flesh is sin, you know, and we're based and born in flesh. A doctor once told me this. She came and she told me, she was trying to help me deal with my issues of forgiveness, because I had a very hard time forgiving myself. As I came into manhood, I understand what I had done in life, everything that I had done, every bad thing I had ever done. And it began to weigh on me. It began to weigh on me heavily. The more and more and more I gained understanding for it. She said, if everybody went around with a sign on their head of the worst thing they had ever done, the worst thing they'd ever thought, we'd get nowhere as a society, because you judging people based upon the worst thing they have done is not a measure of their character. So going through these feelings are very natural, believe it or not, for your situation. And I don't want you to down yourself or feel that way, because I've seen people think about think about killing somebody because they cut them off in a traffic lane. Much less what you're going through and what you're being forced to see. These aren't things you want to see. These are things you're being forced to see. So don't feel that way, especially not here, not where this is the place where you're going to get to tell what you went through.
Yeah. It's these are just natural human emotions, and you go through a lot of them. And despite those things, you want to, or most of us, I at least try to do the best that I can to be a good person. But yeah, man, when it came to some of those guys, like one of them was killed, while we were there. And it was the first time I was like, yes, I actually internally celebrated somebody getting killed there, And those were not, I was in the military, but I was in the Air Force as an intelligence analyst. I wasn't somebody that was trained for combat. I was trained to be an analyst. And so I had this very quick introduction into, real violence. And it was a shock at first, but more than anything, the feelings that it stirred within me were things that I at certain points didn't really understand. And even now, I think about my views towards the FARC as a group, because they still exist, or other terrorist groups, and then I try to find compassion for certain things and try to understand why people do the things that they do. It's possible to find the balance there, but it's hard, and it takes a lot of self-reflection and definition of who you are and who you want to be.
And not only that, not just emotion, because everybody's felt the emotion to want to punch somebody in the mouth. Everybody's felt that. I see people daily that struggle with anger issues. But that's the thing, is being able to control the emotion, whether it's jealousy, love out of control, having an out of control love, just loving, being out of control can be damaging to a person. We have to be able to control our emotions. So the fact that you did control your emotions and you didn't chop Milton up into little pieces is a good thing. That shows a definition of your character. Don't measure yourself lightly. Let's move forward a little bit. Is there, you know what? Let's reflect on something else. Let's look at the other side of that coin. Are there any guards or people that were a member of the FARC that you felt different feelings for, like even a kindness, or, people go through Stockholm syndrome sometimes and they get really close to their captors? How did you feel, and what was the level of those feelings?
So, yeah, believe it or not, first of all, yeah, I know what Stockholm syndrome is, and I absolutely do not have that at all, at all. But on the same token, the situation with who is in the FARC, it's complex. It's not just about people that want to do evil things. The FARC, they try to justify their actions by saying they're a revolutionary group and that they're fighting for the Colombian people. It's all bullshit. Obviously, they're not doing anything good for anybody, but nevertheless, their strategy is to target youths and to recruit them into their ranks. And there's a lot of benefits to that. Number one, there's a lot of young people in the countryside of Colombia and families there. They have a lot of kids because that they're doing manual labor there. I mean, that's like they're creating, a labor force. So the FARC can go into these little villages, and again, they show up in uniforms. They have weapons. They look like they have authority, and it's very easy for them to recruit. But the thing is, not everybody has to voluntarily join the FARC. If they come into town and they need your kids, they just take them. And it's forced recruitment. It's basically abduction. They take those kids and they put them in. So most of the guards that I had gotten to know and I'd spoken to while I was there, they had all joined the FARC at very young ages. I'm talking like 12, 13, 14. That's usually the prime age group where they get them. and then they train them to use a rifle, and then they use them as mules, because remember, we're in the jungle and we're in a lot of places where you can't bring a four-wheel drive, you can't bring a motorcycle. Logistics are handled by human backs. These are kids are carrying these things around. That's how they're resupplying, is by people carrying stuff. And so that's how, that's, even if they don't know how to shoot, even if they can't aim worth a damn, that doesn't matter. If they can carry a sack of rice, that's more value in certain cases. So a lot of my guards were actually minors. There were several that were 14, 15 years old, and there were females in that age group. And here's one of the other disgusting things about the FARC is the bosses are always adults, right? These are older guys in their 30s, 40s, 50s. They always take on young girls. I'm talking 14 and 15-year-old girls to be their girlfriends. I mean, the pedophilia over there is absolutely insane. Every single I've never seen a FARC boss that didn't have a 14 or 15-year-old girlfriend. That's just across the board, and it's normal there. And so we were in one group that had a girl that was 14 years old. She was one of the guards, and her boyfriend, he wasn't even a high-level boss. He was 46 years old. That was the couple, and he used to beat her on a regular, and we could hear that in camp. They would hold us in a certain area of their camp, and they would live in another area. Well, we were close enough where we could hear them fighting and him beating her nightly, man. And it was like, here I am, I'm being held, I'm in the mud, I'm starving, and I'm just praying to get out of here. And on top of this, it's like a domestic violence pedophilia situation going, where this child molester is beating on this young girl. Man, it was just absolute sickness. But that's the way they are. They call themselves a revolutionary group, but they're nothing but a terrorist cult. It's just a sick cult.
Do you think that with the youth, there's an element of brainwashing there? Do they make them read things or practice things?
100%.
Okay.
100%. When, we go to church on Sundays and we pray, we worship, they have something that they do every Sunday, which is exactly that, brainwashing sessions. They forced us to sit in on one of these, and then they tried to we refused, and they tried to get us to go into these brainwashing sessions on Sundays. And they would have them sing, they would randomly call each other out, and they would have to recite communist propaganda, because they're communist group. And that was a regular. They would make them read certain things. That was a regular thing. I just want to but touch on the one thing, with some of these kids, they were very curious about the three of us because we're Americans, and they had been told so many negative things about Americans. And here in the U.S., we'll view each other not as Americans, but if you're black, or if you're Latino, if you're Asian, we look at other ethnicities. But over there, they look at as an American. It doesn't matter if you're black, Chinese, or whatever you are. You're a gringo, right? And it's almost like a different type of racism there. If you're from the United States, they've been told all kinds of bad things about us, and how evil we are, and how they believe that the U.S. has interest in Colombia because we want to steal their fresh water supply. They think that we want to get access to their emerald supply, like we're after their natural resources, and it's just propaganda, but that's what they've been told. And so when they hear all these negative things about gringos, and then they actually have gringos in front of them, they were super curious. And so they weren't allowed to interact with us, but a lot of them, they couldn't help it. They were, these are young kids, and they just wanted to know who we were and what we were about.